What you're asking about is more in ATF's lane, but we work very closely with ATF on our Safe Streets and Violent Crimes Task Forces, and we're always looking for the strongest violation to disrupt the threat. And so whether it's straw purchaser cases or things like that, I know when I was a line prosecutor, I tried a number of straw purchaser cases. Those are important tools. And so often that's one of the best violations to kind of dismantle a violent crime threat.
One of the other things that we haven't, I don't think, adequately addressed in the law yet, but which is skyrocketing, is these ghost guns or privately made firearms. Law enforcement has seen a 1,000% increase in recoveries between 2016 and 2021. In 2022, we had a ghost gun was used to shoot and kill a 16-year-old at West Mesa High School in Albuquerque. And I wish that were a completely isolated case. What is the FBI doing to recover and prevent assembly of ghost guns? And what tools, maybe even more importantly, do you need from the Congress to be able to get your hands around this challenge?
So I would say ghost guns, as you say, represent a real challenge for law enforcement because the kits are cheap and widely available and undercut the ability to trace the firearm and in effect end up undermining the background investigation process. And unfortunately, we are seeing ghost guns more and more in violent crime and gang investigations. Now, as to authorities, you're really talking more ATF in terms of regulation or even legislation, but we do coordinate closely. Whenever we seize ghost guns as part of a takedown, we're obviously working closely with ATF on that. As to other things that Congress can do to help, at the risk of answering every question with the same answer, we need Congress to restore the progress that was made in 23 so that we can sustain our efforts against violent crime and sustain our work in terms of denials of firearms to the people who are legally prohibited from having them.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, and I suspect it will be a similar answer, you know, we made some progress recently with the Fend Off Fentanyl Act that was really designed to prevent fentanyl from getting inside the United States in the first place, but you have to deal with it once it's already here. You mentioned funding and the potential impact that the budget could have on your ability to disrupt that flow. Feel free to reiterate the importance of that and then also touch on other tools that you may need that to address the sort of crisis that we are seeing in communities all across this country.
So we are finding most of the fentanyl that we seize at the FBI is fentanyl that's already here in the United States. And what we're finding is that something like 70% of it is coming up in violent gang takedowns. So that shows you kind of firsthand the nexus between the fentanyl problem and the violent crime problem and some of the most dangerous offenders. And it is not unusual for the FBI, for any given field office, to seize enough fentanyl in one takedown to have wiped out an entire state. God. And so if you start thinking about the impact of the cuts that we've been talking about in this hearing, that's fewer seizures. That's more pills on the market. That's more people dying. I mean, just put it as bluntly as that. And that's just looking at it that way. And of course, we also have all these investigations into cartel leadership. And again, the cuts impact that if we're going to be serious about going after the cartels. Among the other things that we're doing to try to tackle the fentanyl problem, we have an initiative called J-Code that aggressively targets darknet trafficking of fentanyl. We just last year had an operation called Spector that was the largest ever, I think, takedown of darknet trafficking marketplace of fentanyl and other dangerous, synthetic opioids. So that's an important part of our work. I know in your home state of Albuquerque, I just remembered off the top of my head, was a great takedown that they did where they were seizing enough fentanyl to wipe out like an entire state, along with again, back to the nexus with violence, along with hand grenades, ballistic vests, the whole 9 yards. So the fentanyl problem and the violent crime problem are inextricably linked, and of course the fentanyl problem is directly tied to the problems from the other side of the border.
So not a great time to cut his budget.
Certainly it's not. It's unfortunate we have another year of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Senator Peters, thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Director Wray, good to see you again as always, and thank you for your service to our country. Director Wray, last year, as chairman of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, I released a report on the watch listing and screening processes at airports. The report raised concerns about the watch list, including who it is shared with, its implementation, its oversight, as well as the redress process. In particular, the report found insufficient transparency, lack of a holistic approach to screening, and no meaningful options to resolve concerns for Americans who believe that they were misidentified or the subject to discrimination. Certain communities, such as Muslim, Arab, and South Asian Americans, report disparate screening during their travel and the breakdown in trust over the inability to redress the process. Certainly, I think you agree the administration, including the FBI, must effectively target our resources to protect our country from terrorism, first and foremost, but we also need to respect the rights of innocent Americans as well. So my question for you, sir, is I believe you're familiar with this report, and what steps have you taken to ensure that there's more transparency, especially to Congress, about the watch list and other data sets maintained by the Terrorist Screening Center as recommended in the report that my committee published?
So certainly I agree, as you stated, that it's important that the database be used to protect our national security and at the same time respect civil liberties. And no one is placed on the watch list solely because of race, ethnicity, national origin, religious affiliation, or any First Amendment protected activities. And there is a rigorous interagency process. There are continuous review and quality control measures. We're constantly taking advantage of new methods and technologies to strengthen those processes. And while the FBI and the TSC, as I know you know because of your other role, are not responsible for the actual travel screening, we do work diligently with the interagency to try to make sure we're maintaining a current and accurate watch list. Recently, the TSC put out a comprehensive document about the watch list process, which includes everything from the process for nominations, the use of the list, quality assurance measures, and to the heart of your question, the redress procedures. And so our hope is that that document strikes the balance of the two issues that you mentioned in terms of providing more transparency about all those processes so that people know how it works, know how they can challenge if they have something they want to challenge, while at the same time not compromising our national security. Ironically, some of the transparency around this process could itself infringe on people's privacy and civil liberty because of who it identifies in a way that maybe they wouldn't want being identified.
Right. It is always a careful balance, but we have to continue to work. We've been working with your team. We hope we can continue to do that. And it's been a particular issue in Detroit Airport, for example, for reasons you and I have discussed many times. Director Wray, we have seen historic spikes in anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, and anti-Arab American hate incidents, certainly driven by the war between Israel and Hamas. We're also seeing rising anti-immigrant rhetoric, which in the past has inspired domestic terror attacks in Pittsburgh and El Paso, for example. DOJ has also announced it's investigating dozens of violent threats against election workers and has already convicted 13 individuals. And as you said earlier, you're increasingly concerned about the potential for a coordinated foreign terrorist attack here in the homeland. So the threat of terrorist attack is high, and we don't know what will inspire the next attack or where it will happen. But my question for you is, given all of these threats, how is the FBI now prioritizing resources to protect these communities from these varied threats?
Well, you covered a waterfront because there's a waterfront to
Right.
threats. So to start with, on the terrorism side, terrorism, which includes both foreign terrorism and domestic terrorism, remains our #1 priority. That has not changed, and that drives prioritization within all the field offices, for one thing. Second, we, a couple of years ago, elevated civil rights, specifically including hate crimes, to what we call a national threat priority. And the effect of that is to drive prioritization in all the field offices. In addition, I created a few years ago something that we call the Domestic Terrorism Hate Crimes Fusion Cell, because what I found was that sometimes the same act of violence could be considered either a hate crime or an act of domestic terrorism. In many ways, it's the same type of attack. It's just two different legal structures. And in the FBI, the Criminal Investigative Division, we have people who focus on hate crimes, and then of course we have people who focus on the national security side on terrorism. And so this fusion cell that I created brought the two groups together to ensure both that nothing slips through the cracks, but also, maybe more importantly, to try to see if we can better anticipate and to be more proactive to prevent these attacks in the first place as to solely responding after they tragically occur. And I'm proud of some of the work that was done, including, I think for the first time ever, a couple of years ago now, a proactive hate crimes charge that disrupted an attack against a synagogue. I believe it was in Nevada, but it could have been in Colorado because there's one of each.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that and look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today, Director Wray. I continue to be concerned about the threat that the Chinese Communist government poses to critical infrastructure in the United States, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. In Nebraska, this presents distinct vulnerabilities for our agriculture industry and the nation's food supply. For instance, malicious code contained planting data and harm crop yields. It also can be used by foreign actors to steal our ag innovation. What internal mechanisms is the FBI relying on to counter cyber threats to the agriculture industry from China specifically?
So we are specifically concerned, not just as you are, about the China threat more broadly, but about the China threat as it relates to agriculture in particular. I have visited our Omaha office a couple times, met with our partners there, and I know from firsthand experience and contact with them that they are acutely focused on specifically the threats to agriculture. In fact, they're holding, I think, a big summit soon that I was hearing about. It's bringing people from all over the state and the region, again, very much focused on this issue. We have seen in the past the Chinese government or people from China acting on behalf of China attempting to steal cutting-edge agricultural research, even to the point of, I know in Senator Moran's home state of Kansas, we stopped a guy trying to fly out of the country with cutting-edge agricultural research. In Iowa, I can remember we had guys out in the fields digging up genetically modified corn seed, and we worked with the DOJ to prosecute them. So there's the theft, the IP theft part, and we know that China has specifically identified agriculture as one of its areas that it wants to target. It's quite explicit about that. So that's a concern. You also brought up, I think, the critical infrastructure dimensions of this, and we have seen the Chinese government attempting to target multiple sectors, civilian sectors, to pre-position to potentially cause havoc at a time and place of their choosing. And so that's something that we're really trying to focus on. So,
can you tell us that in this setting, specifically what sectors and where that's happened, or should it be in a closed session?
There's some sectors I could share publicly. Whether there's anything I could share about agriculture specifically on that, I'm not sure. I know that what I can say publicly, but it gives you a flavor of what we're dealing with. We conducted, with our partners, a court-authorized operation that took down and exposed a Chinese government effort to pre-position on civilian critical infrastructure that included water, telecommunications, and a variety of others. And again, there was no legitimate purpose to be on the parts of the networks they were on other than to be in a position to wreak havoc at a time and place of their choosing.
Right. You know, we're, in addition to the cybersecurity, we're also worried about communications network, that infrastructure there that the Chinese are looking at, and it's been a challenge to be able to fund FCC, the Rip and Replace program that's out there. So we know that the Chinese have that telecom equipment there. We know the security risks that are involved. Are you able to share any updates today from the FBI's work to evaluate the Chinese network gear that's located especially next to U.S. Military installations? Again, if you could do it here, or if it would need to be in a closed setting. Western Nebraska has assets.
Yeah, on the communications side and the whole rip and replace issue, that's probably something better reserved for another setting. What I can tell you is that we have a number of investigations underway that relate to allegations concerning buying up of land near installations that would be of concern. And it's not that there's anything inherently unlawful about foreign purchase of land, but we get concerned when the purchaser may have ties back to a government that doesn't share our values, and it's positioned near some critical
Right, and
site.
that's what we follow as well. Do you have enough availability? Is there enough transparency in these transactions to easily discover if there's a connection to the Chinese there? As I said earlier, we have concerns in Western Nebraska about some of this.
So it is a challenge. We are, on farmland in particular, we are working with USDA to try to look to some kind of mandatory reporting regime that might be helpful there. And so that's a relationship that continues to grow between the agencies. I would say that the Chinese government, now that more and more businesses, states, countries are wise to what they're up to, are making it harder to trace transactions. And they're not just sort of looking at the combined efforts of us and our partners and just saying, never mind. They're doubling down and trying to figure out how to be more creative to try to hide the hand of the Chinese government in some transactions. So we are having to work that much harder with partners to try to be, to sleuth out the involvement of some state nexus.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good to see you, Director. Director, I wanted to explore a little bit the challenge of the plot to murder a Sikh activist here in the United States. The Department of Justice unsealed an indictment, and the individual, I gather, is in the Czech Republic, and that we've established there are extradition possibilities. Is that progressing?
I can say that I'm very aware of the case you're talking about, and I do feel the case is progressing. There's probably not a whole lot I can say about it for that reason, but yes, the case is progressing.
But we're actively pursuing extradition.
We are, I believe I can confirm that much, yeah.
Thank you. The Washington Post reported that U.S. officials have identified the individual in the Indian Intelligence Agency who was the crafter of the plot, and that the plot was approved by the Chief of Research and Analysis Wing, which is the Indian spy agency. I have not seen that we are pursuing indictments, but are we pursuing indictments against individuals who, not just the hired assassin, if you will, but those who planned and plotted the assassination?
So that's a question that I can't answer here. What I can tell you, just because it's a very ongoing investigation, and what I will tell you is that we feel quite strongly, as I think you do, that individuals cannot attempt to conduct lethal plotting in the United States, even if they feel strongly that somebody is somebody they view as a bad actor. That's not a recourse that they have available to them to engage in lethal plotting.
I raised this particular case because I've previously raised and really tried to put a spotlight on the growing problem of transnational repression. And as the chair, the Senate side chair of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, we hold a lot of hearings in which people are testifying. Many of those folks have been subject to transnational repression by the Chinese government. This morning we had the hearing on the anniversary of Tiananmen Square, and the individuals again spoke about the challenges they have faced. In fact, one individual testified with an assumed name and a mask in order to protect herself from repression. Previously, I've raised the issue of having a better gateway for people to talk to the FBI about transnational repression, because in the past the FBI had said, well, just tell people to call the general tip line. That is not something hardly anyone does of those that I'm aware of who have been subject to this. They're not sure it's a crime. They're not sure it will be confidential. They're not sure there will be a Chinese speaker. So in our FY24 bill, we had report language that directed the FBI to ensure that its tip line is staffed by people with cultural and linguistic ability to communicate with the diaspora and knowledge of the tactics of transnational repression. Has the FBI accomplished that assignment?
Well, what I can tell you is that we have a transnational repression cell that is focused specifically not just on how we analyze the intelligence related to transnational repression, but how we feed that into outreach and engagement with the targeted communities. And that includes everything from translations into the relevant languages to supplying it to field offices for community engagements with dissident and diaspora communities sprinkled around the country, with the whole goal of trying to address the very concern that you're alluding to, which is to recognize that these are folks who, in many cases, the transnational repression is at the hands of law enforcement from these other countries, so they're understandably a little bit reluctant to turn to law enforcement here. So it's an effort to educate them on what transnational repression is, how they can reach out to us to show them that we're there to help.
And that is valuable, and thank you for having your outreach teams engaged in that manner. I'm still not hearing that they're presenting an opportunity to those communities in which those communities feel comfortable sharing their experiences. So I want to continue to raise this. I think from your response, the specific assignment of having the tip line staffed with people with the linguistic ability specific to the population most affected may not have happened yet, but I'll follow up with you in that regard. We have seen and I am, how quickly 5 minutes pass. So I'm out of time, but I'll just close with noting that this challenge is growing. Some of folks that we work closely with, India included, and Turkey, are now engaging in transnational repression. It's particularly important that nobody gets a pass on this. Here in the United States, people should not be possible for foreign governments to threaten them or threaten their families back home. It's such a direct attack on freedom of speech and freedom of association. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Merkley. Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Welcome, Director Wray. Director Wray, we're in the midst of a critical election year, and the American people need to be able to count on a fair process. Are you concerned about election interference this year? A yes or no answer will suffice.
Am I concerned about election interference? Yes.
I'd like to talk about one specific threat, one specific concern that I have. Several federal laws prohibit using governmental authority to interfere in federal elections. And the FBI would be in charge of investigating such a violation of federal law were it to occur. Is that correct?
I'd have to think about the specific examples, but certainly there's a range of types of interference in elections that we have authorities to pursue. So I guess it depends on the facts, the specific factual scenario.
Certainly happened. I know the FBI has investigated extensively in the past in this arena. Here we have a situation that's unprecedented. No former president, no major candidate for president has ever been prosecuted criminally in American history. Yet now we have a situation where the incumbent president's major candidate, major opponent, is being prosecuted in 5 separate jurisdictions all by Democrat partisan prosecutors, and all of this culminating right in the middle of an election season. Does that sound to you like coordinated election interference, or is that just a coincidence?
Well, I'm not going to discuss pending state criminal prosecutions. That's not something I would ever do.
I'm talking about utilizing governmental authority to interfere in an election. Let me get more specific. What we saw happen last week was Alvin Bragg, who ran on a platform of getting Trump, do just that with a flimsy made-up theory and a criminal conviction. Just this weekend, the leader of the Soros organization came out and advised Democrats to repeat the slogan, "convicted felon," so it could be imprinted on voters' minds. Alvin Bragg facilitated that imprint and did just that. Is that coordinated election interference, or is that just a coincidence that would happen?
Again, with all due respect, I'm not going to talk about, you're talking about a state.
Well, I'll go to a federal level then. Right. If you look back to April of 2022, the New York Times reported that President Biden had told his advisors that he wanted Donald Trump prosecuted. That was printed in the New York Times. Just days after President Trump announces that he's going to enter the election process, Merrick Garland appoints Jack Smith to prosecute Trump, President Biden's opponent. Is this coordinated election interference to go after your opponent in a federal election using the Justice Department to do it?
You're asking about a special counsel appointment by the Attorney General and a pending federal case that is in front of a federal judge, and it's not something that I can appropriately discuss here.
Well, here's another situation. When Letitia James was running for New York Attorney General, she campaigned to get Trump. In fact, Representative Dan Goldman called it an individualized political vendetta. Does it seem that using the criminal justice system for a political vendetta is election interference, or is that just a coincidence too?
Again, I'm just not going to weigh in on pending state criminal cases. It's not an appropriate role for the FBI.
If the FBI has the duty to investigate violations of federal law, and federal law prohibits the use of governmental authority to interfere in elections, particularly a presidential election of this consequence, the FBI is not investigating, and I presume, who's going to investigate it? Who's going to look into this?
Well, again, I'm not going to talk about who we are or are not investigating because that's not something that's appropriate for me under DOJ rules. I can tell you that we are going to do our part, and we have one part in protecting our elections from the threats that we have jurisdiction to investigate.
Well, the way the legal stars have aligned in this circumstance is deeply concerning, not only to me, but to the American people. And I just stepped through a number of situations where it certainly appears that there is a coordinated effort to go after the president's main political rival. And it's happening, all of these are convening right at the same time, right in the middle of an election year. They're using facts or theories from years past, but all of it is coming together right at this point in time. It certainly looks like a coordinated effort to me, and it certainly looks like the type of thing that the FBI should be investigating. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hagerty. I would just point out that I think there are a number of people who do not support that conspiracy theory. So I appreciate that you have that view.
If it's a conspiracy, the way this aligns is the most incredible thing I've ever seen, Madam Chairman.
And I share the director's view that that's not appropriate for the director of the FBI to comment on. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Wray. Director, I've had the chance to work with you in an oversight role, both during the Trump administration and the Biden administration, and I admire the ways in which you have worked. Do you think it's important that the FBI maintain its independence from any efforts to politicize the federal law enforcement system?
Very much so. I think the FBI has a unique role to play in American society and in our legal system, and we need to be able to call balls and strikes, no matter who likes it. And unfortunately, in today's world, it is a reality that with everything we do, there's going to be somebody who doesn't like it. But we can't get hung up on that. To me, that's what independence means. We're going to call it without fear about who's going to be angry or upset or alternatively joyous or happy about something we do. We just can't go down that road. So my commitment, my focus, as was stated, I think, very clearly to you and the rest of the Judiciary Committee when President Trump nominated me, was that we're going to focus on doing the work in the right way. We may not get the results that people want in this case or that case, but I will do my best, and I have continued to do my best to make sure we do our work in the right way.
I appreciate that. We've known each other a long time, and I respect the way you conduct yourself as director. We've recently gone through an important process around FISA reauthorization. In your both written and spoken testimony, you said that the FBI is principally focused on the protection of the American people from terrorism, both domestic and international. This is a top priority, and there are significant threats. And I think that there were some significant reforms codified in the reauthorization of Section 702 and the surveillance authorities. I'd be interested in hearing what you are doing to implement them to ensure that the civil liberties of the American people are protected under your directorship and any potential successor, and how you strike that balance appropriately given the urgency of also protecting the American people from terrorism.
So, as you know, the law that was passed recently as the most significant rewrite of FISA since its passage, and there was no kind of on-ramp period, so we implemented it, sort of day one, even though there weren't resources that were provided to do it, and even though it came in an environment, as I've already testified, where we're dealing with effectively a $500 million cut, but we're going to comply with all the requirements. They are resource intensive in their own way because you're talking about pre-approval requirements, for one thing, prohibition on certain queries, again, that have to be detected and audited. One of the things that I did even before the law passed is I created an Office of Internal Audit at the FBI, which did not previously exist, whose sole focus was on FISA compliance. And we achieved great strides in FISA compliance, as is confirmed independently by the court. But it is a significant change in how we operate. And my message to the troops is twofold. One, got to make sure you're doing it in the right way. And number two, given how critical this tool is to protecting the American people from foreign threats, terrorists, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, cyber, especially foreign cyber, we need to make sure that we're using it in the way that Congress and I think the American people expect us to do to protect them, because it is an indispensable tool. I don't use words like indispensable often. It is indispensable.
Well, thank you. And it's a 2-year reauthorization. I intend to follow it closely as we reconsider it 2 years from now. As you know, I've long been concerned about intellectual property theft. Senator Hatch and I passed the Defend Trade Secrets Act, I think back in 2016. And one of the areas that I think is an important priority for us nationally is to protect American invention and innovation, particularly from the CCP, because they intend to be a peer competitor or to exceed our capabilities, largely by stealing our innovations in areas like artificial intelligence and precision biology and other areas. What are you doing to address threats to American innovation? And how would the additional resources you're seeking for FY25 bolster those efforts?
So first off, we are laser focused on our adversaries' efforts to steal American intellectual property. And there is no country, I've been consistent on this for, I think, since early in my tenure, and maybe even in 2017 itself, there is no country that presents a broader, more severe, more comprehensive threat to our economic security, our ideas, our innovation, ultimately our freedom, than the Chinese government. I want to be clear, I'm talking about the Chinese government, not the Chinese people, and certainly not Chinese Americans. And what makes the threat from the PRC so pernicious is that they combined multiple tools. So everything from human efforts, whether it's traditional intelligence officers, co-optees, corrupted insiders, et cetera, with a cyber program that dwarfs anybody else's, combined with what would otherwise be legitimate business activity, joint ventures, different kinds of mergers and acquisitions, partnerships that are in effect just a vehicle to enable the other stuff. And so you put all those avenues together, it becomes particularly challenging. We have north of or around 2,000 active investigations that are just into the PRC's efforts to steal our information and technology. It's up like 1,300% from where it was not that long ago. All 56 field offices. So, and from an investigation perspective, we're incredibly active, and the resources are indispensable to do that. But investigations alone aren't enough. We're much more engaged over the last several years with the business community, trying to work with them so that they can figure out how better to harden their, because they are the attack surface. So there's a lot of outreach. Cyber, the Chinese cyber effort is gigantic. If you took all of the FBI's cyber resources and said, forget Russia, forget Iran, forget ransomware, just do nothing but China, the Chinese government's hacking program would dwarf ours 50 to 1. So the idea that Congress would set us back instead of launching forward on that boggles my mind. And so I would implore, and I know this subcommittee has been a great ally on this stuff, but I would implore Congress more broadly to make sure that we don't do that, because I can guarantee you the Chinese government ain't cutting its budget.
Well, thank you, Director Wray. I'm the chair of the Intellectual Property Subcommittee. Senator Tillis and I have a number of pieces of legislation we're trying to advance to strengthen the tools to protect our IP, but you also need the resources. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Coons. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director, welcome to the committee. Thank you for your leadership. Talk about fentanyl just for a moment. Alaska continues to outpace the other states. Unfortunately, this is a position in place that we would never, ever want to be. Between 2022 and 23, we saw the largest % increase in drug overdose of any state by far. We're referred to as, quote, one of fentanyl's deadliest frontiers. Just from last year, the drug overdoses increased by 40% from 22 to 23, FY 22 to 23. And of these overdoses, 3/4 were from fentanyl. And so we are seeing our cities under attack, but even more troubling is the very, very remote, small, oftentimes Alaska Native villages of 800 people, where the cartels, those who are moving these drugs, know that they can get 10 times more for this poison than anywhere else. And so they're targeting our smallest of small communities. So we're seeing this awful increase, and yet if we look at what is happening in other areas, many states have seen reductions in overdose death rates during this same period. What are you doing there that is allowing for greater levels of success? What are the obstacles to doing the same in places like Alaska? It was somewhat gratifying to see a recent announcement that the U.S. Attorney's Office there in Alaska had announced new charges against this ring, where there had been 53 defendants named. Now there are additional charges. This is good. This is positive. But we're looking at what we're up against, and we're a state where the stuff is coming in by air. It's coming in a little bit by vessel, but that and the mails. So we know where the points of entry are, and we're still not able to do the interdiction that is making a difference to turn this around. You got any words that you can share with people who are really very, very anxious about what we're seeing with fentanyl?
Well, certainly, I'm acutely aware of what a big problem is up there, and of some of the challenges that law enforcement in your home state have to contend with. I've been up to visit, as you know, a couple times,
Which we appreciate.
and on one of them in particular, the Alaska State Troopers, with whom we have a great relationship, took me up in a helicopter to be able to kind of get a better sense of just the sheer sprawl and remoteness of some of the communities that you're talking about. We are working through the Alaska High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Initiative, and that's a big part of it, not just on the investigations, enhancing those, but promoting interagency partnerships, increasing awareness. Part of that effort, in addition to big cases like the 53-person one you mentioned, and the seizures that came with that, is to try to make sure that people, including in some of these more remote communities, kind of know what behaviors to be on the lookout for, how to report, who to report it to, that kind of thing. You mentioned some of the reduction in overdose deaths that you're seeing in some other states. The one thing I would say about that is that overdose deaths as a metric for progress, I think is in some ways frustratingly misleading, because first response is getting so much better in some states, so that what you're having is the same. You might have the same or maybe even more overdoses, but because there's wider availability, faster availability of Narcan, the people who were overdosing who before would have died aren't dying. And so it has the pernicious effect of making people feel like they're making more of a dent in the problem than they are. Don't get me wrong, it's great that the people aren't dying, and it's great that there's emergency care to keep them alive, but overdose deaths in some other state may not be as successful as it might appear to you by comparison.
And I absolutely get your point, and what we need to be doing is basically choking the poison off in the first place so it doesn't get to my state or any others. I'm out of time here, but I want to ask one final question here, and this relates to the Not Invisible Commission. This is related to murdered missing Indigenous peoples. They got their report to Congress and the federal agencies back November of last year. It recommends that law enforcement, including FBI, are trained in MMIP, violence, crime, and human trafficking, coordination with BIE, and all of that. And I'm hoping that we've got some good progress that is being made by the FBI in implementing the provisions of this report. The concern that I have here is I just mentioned the fentanyl crisis in this state. We've got a stepped-up initiative that we must do when it comes to those vulnerable people, murdered, missing, and particularly our Indigenous women. But we've got one field office in Alaska for the FBI. We have 2 satellite offices, one in Fairbanks and one in Juneau. Do you think that that is sufficient resourcing to cover a state that you have acknowledged is it's huge? It's 1/5 the size of the rest of the country. But to be dealing with these issues that are impacting us in disproportionate ways, do we need more resources up north?
We clearly need more resources, although I will tell you we need more resources.
Disproportionate ways, do we need resources up north?
We clearly need more resources, although I will tell you we need more resources just across the board. And that I say sometimes, but it applies very much to this context. Everywhere I go, somebody has a really good, and I don't mean that sarcastically, a really good idea of someplace the FBI needs to be devoting more resources.
And
I have not yet found anybody who can tell me in any responsible way where the FBI can be devoting less resources. And so this is a time for Congress to lean forward in this next appropriation. I'm very aware of both how small our field office, our Anchorage division, which, as you say, includes not just the headquarters city in Anchorage, but the other 2 RAs as well, by comparison to just the sheer immense area that they have to cover. And it always strikes me every time I'm talking with them about the challenges that presents, not just the sprawl, but how few roads there are, and how that people have to get around and all the things that does to complicate law enforcement work in that area. So Anchorage needs more resources, but the FBI needs more resources.
FBI needs more resources. The question that I didn't ask you was about the northern border and what we're seeing with those on the terrorist watch list coming through, because we're anxious about that. So we got all kinds of issues. And again, how we're resourcing, regardless of where it is a challenge. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, and thank you, Director Wray, for being here with us. It looks like I might be your cleanup batter here, so that might be good. I want to go to something that Senator Murkowski was talking about. She talked about her state. You're well aware of West Virginia, unfortunately leading the way, and our numbers went up a little bit over the last year, which was very discouraging because we have a lot of communities and community involvement, and the FBI has been involved with this on the law enforcement side, but all kinds of issues to try to lower those numbers. So it was a bit disappointing to us. But I wanted to ask what the FBI, the drug cartels, the transnational criminal organizations that we see along our southern border mostly, I would imagine, what kind of additional resources or different strategies can the FBI employ? Because obviously fentanyl still streaming across the southern border. They're obviously pressing a lot of the pills before they come over. The whole thing with the chemicals coming from China. What are you seeing in this in terms of targeting the transcontinental criminal organizations?
So certainly the vast majority of the fentanyl in this country comes from the cartels in Mexico, sourced from precursor chemicals from China.
Right.
And then is trafficked here or distributed here primarily by violent gangs. And so I think to be effective against the threat, which is really an epidemic, we need to be trying to hit all of those different choke points. Mm-hmm. The FBI plays some role in almost all of them, but not uniquely. This is way bigger than any one government agency. Frankly, it's bigger than government itself, but so we are, through our Safe Streets Task Forces, going after the gangs that are distributing this stuff on the streets. We are, through our transnational organized crime task forces and working on OSADEF strike forces, going after the cartels and the cartel leadership, which are the source of supply. We are trying to push, in our own way, the Mexicans, and we do have good relationships with our Mexican law enforcement counterparts, but this sort of onesie-twosie effect of a great extradition here, a takedown there, those are things to be celebrated, but they really aren't enough to affect the problem at scale. And then the China piece, the precursor chemicals, is a huge part as well. One of the things we're trying to do now, and I'm very pleased about this, the Director of National Intelligence, Israel Haynes, has convened, and we've been doing an intelligence community sprint on the fentanyl problem to try to figure out how we can better ensure sharing of information between the different intelligence agencies who are not law enforcement and law enforcement to have the information flowing. We clearly have to go after the money. After all, this whole thing is profit-based, right? So we need to figure out better ways to go after the money. So some of those are some of the things that need to be done, but it is incredibly frustrating. I know that our offices in West Virginia, who are dealing with, as you say, on the receiving end of so much of this problem, I'm continue to be blown away, frankly, by how high-performing those offices, some of the takedowns they've had in West Virginia for a comparatively small footprint is really something that's inspiring.
I guess that's a plus and a minus. The minus being they're there, the plus being they're being disrupted and caught. So that's congratulations to them. I know there's been some big busts. I want to ask you about the NICS system because the question I have is, and thank you for the visit, and I thought it was a really good visit. I'm trying to understand your budget where you have a technical adjustment of $43 million proposed in your budget regarding implementation of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. We're being told that this could impact the 170 people that are at the NICS facility that are working in that. How is that going? And can you explain a little bit the anomaly that you have here as one of the program changes for 2025?
So I can see why it's confusing a little bit. There's two things going on. One is the 170 positions that Congress gave us with BISCA
Right.
was one-time funding. And so one of our requests, which I think is 43 million tied to the 170 positions, is designed to make sure that one-time funding, because we've largely filled almost all of those 170 positions. If we don't get that reappropriated, that's gone. So that's incredibly important that we get those 170 positions and that 43 million reauthorized. So that's part of it. Then on top of that, though, because of the pace and the volume, we have asked for a smaller, but nonetheless an enhancement. So bottom line, it's maintain the 170, which was one time only,
And then add.
and then add a little bit with the enhancement that we've asked for.
You know, some of this, and I'll stop here, but the statistics that this was early on when the bipartisan bill was being discussed at NICS. There had been some disruptions where the information showed that if you knew what had happened pre-18 years old, you would have fallen into that category, and there were disruptions where people were unable to secure a weapon and because of mental health or whatever. Is that continuing? I mean, is that trend continuing that is disrupting? Or?
We're definitely seeing that. I'm struck by the number of times when we have that, you know, because there's mental health piece, there's the juvenile piece,
Right.
and then there's the contact with law enforcement about the individual piece. And the number of times when the conversation, the exchange with law enforcement in whatever state it is saying, whoa,
Yeah.
yeah, we know who that is, and that would not be a good thing. We have signisignificantly improved the timeliness of those. You know, I
Yeah,
remember
that
when
was
you
the
and I were
question,
there,
yeah.
it was still kind of a work in progress,
Right.
but I think it's up like tenfold how much faster it's happening, which is great. But part of the reason we asked for the enhancement on top of the original part is that, because of course we're going to conduct the congressionally mandated checks, but
We need more
we
resources.
need
to
we're
do it.
very proud, as you know, and as I know you are, of how quickly NICS can turn things around, so that the giant majority of people who are law-abiding
through
citizens
quickly,
who have a Second Amendment right to buy their weapon can get it timely and not have it be
Right.
held up. But the problem, if we don't get the funds appropriated, is it's going to have an impact on how much we can cover and how fast we can cover it.
Yeah, I mean, just for context, I saw the statistics that I have, just last data point is in 2023, there were 29 million NICS firearm background checks in the country that go through the office in West Virginia. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Capito. I have not yet asked questions, so I will do that. And then I know Senator Moran has one more question. But I wanted to go back to the issue of disinformation and election security. You talked about China having a 50-to-1 cyber advantage in terms of their cyber operations. We saw before the New Hampshire primary earlier this year a domestic actor who used artificial intelligence to voice clone President Biden and target voters in New Hampshire as part of a robocall scam. How are we responding? I mean, this was a domestic issue, but it points to the potential challenges from AI and the threat that can present to our elections. So how are we responding to what we're already seeing from Russia and China in terms of the disinformation? And how are we sharing, how is the FBI sharing what you know with local law enforcement and election officials so that everybody's aware of what the threat is?
So we are, of course, seeing, and I've been warning about this for some time, the role of AI to enhance efforts that our foreign adversaries have already been engaged in. And one way to think of that is just like social media, when it first really came of age, was this gigantic bullhorn that took something that has been happening for decades, namely foreign disinformation warfare, and just scaled it in a way that was particularly challenging. I think that's the right way to think about AI. It's not that it changes fundamentally what it is our adversaries want to do, or why we need to be worried about it, or what authorities the FBI has and our role in combating it. It allows them to amplify, to do it, to make it more sophisticated, more deceptive, cheaper, faster. All the reasons people love AI for good things, they can use for bad things. And so our approach is in many ways much the same, which is to make sure that we're engaging with our partners, sharing what we're seeing and hearing, where we have authorities that apply to us, taking action. But information sharing is the key. I will say that when it comes to AI specifically, there's an increasingly important role for the private sector, because if you're gonna detect AI at scale, certainly, it's gonna be the American private sector that's gonna be the key to doing that. So we are trying to partner up with the business community to make sure that they're doing their part on that, because AI is actually pretty good at detecting AI. And there is a role. America leads the world in AI innovation, which is why the Chinese are trying to steal it, by the way. And that's why we need to make sure that American companies are using their innovation to help protect our democracy.
So is there more that we should be doing in Congress to make it in the interest of some of those companies, that they do a better job of policing what is on their sites?
Well, that's probably a longer discussion for another day. I will just say for right now, because this is important, and I know it's something you both care about, when it comes to these companies, there is this broader phenomenon of how important it is for them to take some kind of ownership for the way in which their products and services are used. And that applies not just in this context, but in a subject that you will hear about from law enforcement, not just all over this country, but all over the world, is the way in which these companies are implementing warrant-proof encryption, which basically means that child predators, terrorists, fentanyl traffickers, et cetera, can find a space where they can go and communicate and act, and law enforcement, no matter how rock solid your legal process is and how independent the judicial approval is, won't be able to have access to this information. The threats won't be gone. The kids will still be victimized. The predators will still be out there. But now the companies, knowing that this is happening, are moving in this direction. It's a business decision that these companies are making. And so I don't think it's unreasonable for us to expect these companies to take some ownership of this process. And if we don't do something collectively as a country, we're going to wake up and find that we are blind in a way that's really going to put people's lives at risk.
Well, that's an excellent segue into my next question, which is we are hearing about a new and growing threat where individuals have been using content manipulation, so AI, to create sexually explicit photos and videos that appear to be real. It complicates investigations because it's difficult to tell what's real and what's not. So I know that the FBI has released a public service announcement earlier this year warning about this, but can you talk about how we're also asking private companies to look at that issue and do a better job of policing what's on their sites?
Certainly we share your concern about online targeting of kids. It's not just magnified the problem, but it's created a whole new set of actors and globalized the problem. So you have financially motivated extortion, for example, which has started to get more notoriety. And AI is just one more tool, a weapon in that context to enhance those efforts. But while the technology may change, whether it's AI generated or not, child sexual abuse material is illegal, and we're going to aggressively go after it. I would like to continue to work more and more closely with companies to try to see how they can be part of the solution. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. Our folks in that program, the Violent Crimes Against Children program, are some of the hardest working people in the entire FBI, dealing with some of the worst that humanity has to offer. And I think we last year had something like 3,000 arrests and rescued, for all intents and purposes, something like 700 kids. So again, I come back to the budget discussion.
Right.
What's going to happen to those kids if Congress makes the mistake of going backwards like they did in '24 with the budget?
Well, I think you won't get any argument from Senator Moran or me about that. I just want to close with one final question, and that has to do with anomalous health incidents, also known as Havana syndrome, because the FBI has been one of those agencies that's been working to establish policies and procedures to provide help for people who are affected. Can you give us any kind of an update on where you are in that process, and whether people are beginning to see support that they had hoped for treatment?
So, as you know, there's nothing more important to me than the health and safety of my workforce and their families. And the benefits provided for required DOJ to issue regulations to allow us to start to make the payments. I'm pleased that those regulations finally went into effect last month, May 20th. We didn't sit around just waiting for that, though. We put in place all kinds of procedures and mechanisms so that the minute the regulations went into effect, we could kick into high gear and start the payment process. And so I know that we have, I can't give you the exact number, but I know we have people already, because we've been trying to improve our communication with the workforce too about this. So I know that we already have some people whose payment applications and so forth are now already under the rules now in process. And so I'm hopeful that it'll now flow quickly, because we didn't have to then build on additional delay after the time the rules went into effect.
Great, thank you. I'm pleased to hear that. Senator Moran.
Senator Shaheen, thank you. Director, just almost every day, certainly every week, I have a conversation with someone in Kansas, or I read something in the newspaper or hear on television or radio news about a ransomware, a cyber attack. I mean, it's just, it's prevalent. It's more than prevalent. It's dominant. And it's a small business. It can be the courthouse, our state's court system, the county treasurer's office. What is it that we could be doing, perhaps just as public servants, to try to minimize the chances that somebody is attacked, or that they take the necessary steps to prevent it? Is there you talked about the private sector in the conversation with Senator Shaheen. Is there a chamber of commerce, a business organization? Are there steps that a business can take, a county commission, a city office that can take to prevent this from happening? And are there tools that need to be provided to local law enforcement to assist in this? I think this is so common that I don't know how the solution can rest with law enforcement of the FBI in particular. And my guess is that any kind of effort to prosecute or to shut down those who are committing the cyber attacks ends in not a significant amount of results.
So for all the reasons you said, ransomware is one of our top, certainly one of our top cyber priorities. I think there are a few things I would say with a glimmer of some good news buried in there. So the first is that we are very heavily engaged in private sector outreach, specifically to try to build resilience and harden the private sector's infrastructure from ransomware attacks. There are basic things that can be done, for example, in terms of having appropriate backups and things like that. I think you would be surprised to learn how often ransomware attacks are enabled not by some really sophisticated, black belt level intrusion, but by somebody somewhere at a business who didn't engage in proper cyber hygiene. They clicked on the link that they shouldn't have clicked on. It happens way more often than you would expect, including in very sophisticated places. Or the company or the business didn't upload the appropriate, those patches and updates that we all get. And those things matter. So things like that, if every victim or victim-to-be took some of these basic cyber hygiene steps, we wouldn't stop ransomware, I want to be clear, but we would significantly make it harder for ransomware actors to be successful. So that's one. And so the more everybody can help us spread that message, we will build some greater level of resilience that way. The second thing that is just incredibly important is we need the victims to reach out to us as quickly as possible when they're hit. I think sometimes people are worried because we discourage paying the ransom, that if they tell, our position is we don't think you should pay the ransom, and we're happy to explain why, but whatever you decide to do, make sure you contact us. Because there have been times when businesses have contacted us quickly where we're able to help them figure out, there have had cases where we've been able to obtain decryption keys so they can get their systems unlocked, protect their information, and not pay the ransom. But that can't happen if they don't contact us. There are times when we can chase the money, working with the victim, and basically claw back the ransom before it gets to the bad guys. So things like that that we can do, but none of it we can do if the company doesn't contact us right away. That's what's so important. There's lots of things that can happen. The last part that I would say is we are starting to figure out, not just the FBI, but collectively with our partners, what success against ransomware could look like. And that is joint sequenced operations, campaigns, sustained campaigns against particular ransomware actors, where we go after not just the administrators of the ransomware group and their affiliates, but their whole ecosystem, their money launderers, their service providers, their bulletproof hosters, all that stuff. So we're going after all the people that are related to the ransomware group. We're going after their infrastructure. So we're seizing their servers, shutting down their domains, things like that. So we're going after the people, we're going after the infrastructure, and then of course ransomware is a for-profit crime. We're going after their money. We're chasing their cryptocurrency, which is invariably the way the ransoms are paid, and we're getting better at disrupting the flow of the ransom back to the ransomware actors. We're not where we need to be, but we are starting to see signs. We've had situations where we'll knock down a particular ransomware group and they're flailing around and out of business for months and months at a time. So we started to get a taste of what success could look like, and it's a team effort. FBI, some of the other intelligence agencies, foreign law enforcement, the private sector itself, all kind of working together. And so we have had some successes. I think about the Hive ransomware group, where we had basically hacked the hackers and gotten into that, and they didn't know we were in. And so they kept trying to conduct ransomware attacks, and we kept getting the decryption keys and providing them to the victims, and then it wasn't working. Eventually, we dismantled the whole thing, but we're getting more innovative and creative in using court-authorized operations, not just to try to arrest people, although we definitely want to do that, but to essentially shut down the operation itself.
That is more encouraging than I expected. If someone is subject to ransomware, a cyber attack, they'd call their local police department, their county sheriff, and those local law enforcement officials would know what to do. Is that a true statement?
Would not know what to do?
Would know what to do. Local law enforcement knows what the next step is.
Well, I think we try to engage with local law enforcement, as you know, because you've seen it firsthand in Kansas every day. My hope would be that the local law enforcement would tell them contact the local FBI field office, but really they should be contacting us because there are things that we can do that probably the local police chief or sheriff, can't. But of course, again, I'm going to sound repetitive here. All these things take resources, and in particular in the cyber arena, we need to be able to make sure we can pay and train the most sophisticated cyber talent, and that is an issue within the federal government to make sure that pay authorities and, of course, the funds that are appropriated behind it are even across the federal government, so we don't have a situation, which I am concerned about, where other federal agencies start cannibalizing each other for the cyber talent that we all need. So we do need to make sure that there's pay authorities and pay funding to ensure that real black belt talent who makes all the difference in some of these cases
The FBI
is kept.
have those pay authorities. Do you have those pay authorities?
Our authorities are not where they need to be. So it's a combination of both the funding and the authorities. It's a mix.
And I wonder if insurance, private insurance, is a component of addressing this problem. More businesses or entities that get insured against a ransomware attack. I assume the insurance companies then are going to insist on different behavior by their insured.
I do think insurance, cyber insurance is an important part of all this. Now, I will say we see ransomware actors researching victims and researching insurance to try to figure out, it's kind of like, well, I want to figure out how much they have in their wallet before I rob them, kind of thing. So there's a little bit of that going on, but I would not discourage people from getting the insurance. And we do have our own engagements with the cyber insurers as well to try to make sure we're working with them. So that's another important piece to all of this.
I would compliment you on your capability of being repetitive today. Thank you, Doctor.
You think we got the message?
What was he saying?
Thank you, Director Wray. If there are no further questions, senators may submit any additional questions for the subcommittee's official hearing record until June the 11th. We would ask that the FBI respond within 30 days to any of those future questions. And now the subcommittee stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair. Thank you.